All right, so thank you, Michael. I'm going to start off just basically just reminding us of what we agreed to talk about, which was how can social workers be anti-discriminatory in their practice without having an in-depth knowledge of philosophy. And it's interesting how Derek kicked us off in terms of having a sense of self and some of the discussions around culture. And then yourself, Michael, who started talking about decolonizing and influencing the curriculum, because that's basically how this journey for myself began in terms of wanting to explore philosophy and its association with anti-discriminatory practice. And interestingly, Paul and I are relatively new to this university. And when we came in 2 months in between each other, we had to decide on which lectures, and I basically fought Paul. He didn't know that I was fighting him for it in a nice subtle way to teach the ethics and what they called it here, ethics and human rights module. And really for me, it was based on a real sense of, I don't really like the word decolonizing, but it's the word that we tend to use, but how we can influence the curriculum. Influence is the word that I'm more comfortable with, because I tend to feel that decolonizing is saying things didn't exist and we need to take them away, as opposed to influencing and thinking about what other things influence the way we think about things. I'm hoping these slides will move through. Yeah. So I'm starting with this slide and talking a little bit about it, because probably between the two of us, we've spent about 2-3 days trying to find an image that talked to philosophy that we wanted to talk to. And some of you might think, oh, well, that's a bit strange, because whenever we started to think about how did we want to visualize this idea of philosophy in the curriculum, we came across images of ancient white men doing this or that. And it then went against everything that we were trying to say, is that we are influenced in terms of our philosophies from lots of different people, different countries. And Paul happened upon this, I think it was Wednesday night, Thursday. And so we felt this best depicts what we've been trying to do in the curriculum, in terms of looking at philosophies from all different angles. And you'll see the slides in a bit more detail. Okay, so this is what we wanted to touch on: philosophy and diversity. And so I'm going to go over to Paul. Yeah.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you, everyone, for getting us to be part of this discussion. And we thought we need to be revisiting some of the things we actually already know. The fact that an issue about diversity, for example, which is at the core of what we do as social workers, but also reflect on the fact that certainly you can see through that philosophy actually is reflecting diversity. Philosophy being the attitude, the theory of attitude that guide the principle of behavior. That our behavior are being guided by certain attitude, and those attitude comes from somewhere. And it's about the difference in recognizing differences between people. And it's about understanding that there are different methodical consideration of reality. What we have, what we are informed with, the traditions informs how we look at the world. And the thought about this is pretty much, if this presentation is talking pretty much about students and the social work students and what they are going to be doing in practice. So it's a reflection, thinking more about them in the reality of practice. And so if we acknowledge that there are differences, there is diversity, then and that the fact that philosophy backs that up, that is crucial in this discussion. And so the second element to that is to understand the fact that because we recognize that we are different, we are also recognizing that we insist the worth and the respect, the dignity and worth of individuals. It's about acknowledging and honoring these people, individuals. It's about seeing value in them as human beings. It's about if we value them as human beings, we're also giving them freedom of choice for that matter. And so it's important to look at people as they are. And if we honor that they're different, and we honor that the fact that they're worth as individuals, then also it means that we are recognizing that they're people from different backgrounds, and so diversity, for that matter, is important. It's about paying due regard to these differences. For that, essentially, what it is about what is it that we do as social workers? Why are we in this industry? It's about trying to find best outcomes for each individual that we attend to. And the best way to do that is by looking at these people differently, and as from people from different backgrounds and different philosophies. So the idea here is the acceptance of that there are different philosophies that inform different people, as in service users as well as individual social workers. And so the importance of these people, social workers in particular, to understand these differences, it should sit at the core of what they're being told. My colleague is going to touch more on those differences, and there are a few questions to look at that for us to kind of dig more on the fact that people are different.
So what we headed this up was philosophy and social work education. We're both academics, so we're coming from that idea. And then we had in our head this point: is it philosophy of social work or philosophy in social work? And our thoughts were that we've kind of created a philosophy of social work, and Paul's in the next few slides going to talk a little bit more about that. But what we're arguing for in education is that philosophy in social work, and I'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a little while. But then we started posing these questions in terms of why social work, in our view, is not looking, and obviously Michael and Martin, when you pose this question about how do we see social work philosophy, and are we dumbing down, and why are we just looking at systems theories? And that's what really appealed to me, to sort of like knock on your door saying, yes, we wanted to present. So the questions that came to mind is, do social work academics even understand philosophy? What do we mean about philosophy? And should philosophy be more explicit in the curriculum? And by that, we know, and Paul's going to talk about that in a little while, about the PCFs, etc. But we're saying, we're arguing that it needs to be more explicit. Did academics or lecturers study philosophy themselves? And why do social work guidance tools not capture deeper philosophical understanding? So these are questions we're posing. And are there social work programs which teach philosophy, not just, it should say, values and ethics? Okay. And I'm going to let Paul talk us through these other areas now. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, the thought about the tools we have in social work, for which we draw a lot of knowledge and inform practice, and where do they come from, and whether these tools are deep enough and they have enough philosophy in them to allow us to do the work we want to do. We'll pick three of them: Social Work England standards. We've got the Basel Code of Ethics, as well as the PCFs. And I thought to simplify that exercise is to talk about at least one or two themes that cuts across all three. And with that, I have three, two rather, that is privacy and confidentiality. All these tools do mention privacy and confidentiality. Social Work England, for example, 2 point, for which is actually not we have put a point out here, but so if you visit Social Work England Standards 2, 2.2 as well as 2.6 talks about privacy and confidentiality. If you visit move forward with this. Okay, if you check Boswell's Code of Ethics, Code of Ethics 5 as well as 10, both talks about privacy as well as confidentiality. If you also look at PCFs 2, if you check bullet point, the last one at the bottom, it says promote and protect the privacy and confidentiality of individual, Now, that is fine, talking about that, and it's general understanding that is clear that, I mean, people have to be, there is a legislation that tells us to do that. We've been taught in universities that's what we should be doing, and there is logic in doing that. But at the same time, there is the kind of people that we meet. We remember we were talking about diversity earlier. The kind of people we meet are informed differently about these things. The people, for example, from Africa or Southeast Asia, the whole idea about collectivism in the way they deal with people and they keep information, they maintain privacy, the whole idea about community and the family interdependency informs a lot about what they expect in relation to confidentiality, in relation to privacy. Now, the understanding of that being informed by philosophy will mean a lot more to social workers, and in terms of dealing with them, even to the extent of dealing with them in relation to ethical and dealing with ethical dilemmas that comes with that. So what we're insisting is to say, well, there is all these tools that we have in the profession that talks about people and the people we meet, which are diverse, but they don't go deep enough to tell us about what informs the understanding of this to allow us to work in a way that that is smoother, if you like. And so think about the Ubuntu philosophy. There was a mention of Ubuntu philosophy earlier, and some of you may know more about this, for which Ubuntu is a philosophy, it's a South African philosophy, basically, for which the element of loyalty, the element of there's quite strong feeling of support and allegiance that comes with that, for which you kind of have people next to you or community as if it's yourself. So there are quite porous lines of confidentiality, if you like, and privacy in those kinds of relationship. How much is that taught in our universities to allow social work students to deal with people from that background in a way that there is some understanding of how they understand privacy and the confidentiality? So this is not to acknowledge that, yes, we do have tools, and they do mention these things, but perhaps the best of them would be to get more of an understanding for student, in particular, and practitioner, more understanding of what it means for people they deal with in those areas. In this case, with an example of privacy and confidentiality. I will bring in Arlene to pick up from now.
Okay, so the module, as I've mentioned before, ethics and human rights for social work practice. When I got it was a relatively new module. I think it's around once before I started, and when I looked at it, I felt it was very Eurocentric in its outlook in terms of studying the principles of ethics and human rights as it's called. And one of the things for me, having literally come in to full-time academia last year, was the fact that it didn't resemble what I know what's going on in practice. And as we said, that this was really looking at how are we anti-discriminatory in practice. And having been a service manager for 20 odd years, one of the things that I found when you're getting newly qualified social workers or people coming to work, when you ask them a question about anti-discrimination practice in any shape or form, it's almost just said as rote, but no real sense of meaning. And I wanted to begin in this module to get people to sort of think about who they are working with in terms of service users, and to move past the fact that, yes, as Paul talked about, our guidance looks at sort of a more Eurocentric way of practicing. but the receivers of our services aren't all white European. And so when I designed it in this manner, and I'm going to take you through a number of the lectures. So we did the philosophy of religion and talked about all the religions that you can see here. I got involved people with lived experience, so had video recorded interviews of people from these different faiths talking about not only their faith, but the philosophical underpinnings of their faith, so that students began to understand the faith more than cultural competency, but with a degree of cultural humility. And then we spent a lecture looking at African American and Caribbean philosophers, and I took students through people like Van Toppin, who's before Christ, and BC, as we would say, and he talked about the importance of listening. And one of the things that was interesting to me when I began to discover him, but also to the students, is that we know that Socrates didn't write anything. Van Toppin wrote something, and we don't even use him. Given that we teach students about the importance of listening, that I thought it was a really good idea for students to begin to understand where some of those early ideas of listening came from. We talked about Fanon, which most people are aware of, in terms of the ideas around decolonizing and moving past racist beliefs. And Michael, your interesting point about Darwin came up in terms of just talking and thinking about where some of our belief systems that lead to discriminatory practice, particularly when it comes to sort of race and working class people, etc., might well start with, in terms of Darwin, just that there are philosophers who began to talk about the issues around people of colour and underprivileged people. We also looked at Asian philosophers and looking at sort of ideas around kindness and compassion, sort of Buddhist principles, to start to get people to sort of think about, again, where some of these ideas may come from. And obviously, because of time, we're whistling through this. We looked at Chinese philosophers, and particularly looked at ideas around legalism and what happens in terms of state control. And again, Michael, when you were talking about what we do in terms of risk aversion, some of us who've practiced for centuries, it feels like 30 odd years, we know that social work has changed, and we are very risk averse. And for me, it's important for us to begin to touch on ideas around legalisms. And so, as I said, we touched on Chinese philosophies. We also looked at indigenous philosophers, and Ronald Lee came to mind, and Nan Joyce, talking about the travelling communities and ideas around our stereotypical views of the Romany culture, and what do we do with that in terms of current day practice, and with the way we think about travel and community, and not understanding the rich history that they themselves have, rather than this stereotypical narrow negative view. And obviously you wouldn't be doing philosophy without talking about ancient and modern philosophers. And I often tell students that I'm a Socrates girl, very much about questioning what's right and wrong, and comes to mind ideas of how I teach students, which is not just that I'm giving them information, but getting them to sort of question and think about the information's given to them, to sort of develop ideas around how they might work with service users in a way that isn't coming from this place of always knowing, but in a place of discovery. And then we touched on, in terms of modern philosophers, people like Carol Gilligan, who talked about this hard idea of the conversation being real and being in a space where, as she says, quote, I found that if I say what I am really thinking and feeling, people are more likely to say what they're really thinking and feeling. And so one of the lectures, I haven't put it up on the slide, but it was discovering self and where our philosophical and value bases come from. And then obviously we talked about some ethical thinkers. Conscious of time, I'm not going to talk too much about that. And looking at morality and also beliefs and ethics. So that's how we sort of designed the module to take students through that. So, what we did a debate in the last week in a timely fashion that suited us having this discussion. And I posed the question, Michael and Martin, that you posed to us to try and get students' feedback. And this is, and then you'll see, obviously, because of time, we're not going to go through it, but just some of the ideas that students fed back. And for me, it was important to think about this from a point of view of, we might think that philosophy is too deep and difficult, and some students raised that, but they were keen to look at it. So they said modern philosophy has been the most useful lesson in the ethics and module, because it's provided a framework for understanding how philosophy links to modern day. The works of philosophers such as Kant and Marx have shaped my understanding of ethics. Modern philosophy has equipped me with various ethical theories that can be applied to the real world situation. By studying these theories, we can better understand morality and make informed decisions which align with our values. I'll just go to another one here. I've enjoyed lectures on African and Caribbean philosophical approaches, as it put a lot of my personal culture and identity into perspective, which I found myself reflecting on and wanting to know more about. I enjoyed Caribbean philosophy because it talks to who I am, but also the activities we did working in groups to discover a philosopher helped me further my understanding. Learning philosophy has been enjoyable and challenging at sometimes because it was all new to me. However, I've gained knowledge of philosophy, the different approaches and how they've been used in social work in the past and present. Talked about there being too many for them to think about, and the ethical dilemma lesson. This is because it helped me understand what to expect in practice and how to handle it. And last, it's opened my mind about the history of different cultures and the philosophy behind it. Oops, that's my timer to myself. Right. So just quickly, way forward, do you want to pick up on that, some of that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, a few items to cover there. Jump to the second one.
Yeah.
The second one, for example, which we thought it was very, very important. I mean, the idea that students being exposed to more understanding of the word means that bring more self-awareness to them. And this is crucial in social work, because then the moment they sit with service users, they can easily reflect on all those philosophies that they've learned to inform the practice that they need to. I don't think we'll touch on all of what we have here, actually. Some of them. We have touched on that one, the last one, philosophy be part of. Yes, so the idea is that if wherever possible, curricula needs to carry more philosophical understanding. So whether it's a module or somehow it is captured within the curricula, we think that it's important to expose students to more philosophical understandings and use them, allow them rather to apply them during practice. Yeah, that's it really. Those are the key points.
There we go. I'll stop sharing. There we go.
Great, thank you, Paul and Arlene. Are there any questions, points, things like that? I have to say, one of two things before anybody else says anything. One of the things is really interesting that you have a module that's specifically about ethics. And I think that's a really a good way of and a good thing to do rather than trying to squeeze it into something else. I also thought the way that you went about it by, instead of it being some kind of amalgamous, this is ethics, this starts from Social Work England, how do we do this? But actually looking at the areas that you did, like picking out religion, picking out from different philosophical traditions, seemed really, really interesting and really good. I think I'd quite like to study in that class. And one of our, hopefully this is the student, one of our students here saying they'd like it in addition to the course that we've provided. One of ours has said the class sounds really interesting. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, any questions? We are slightly pushed for time. So, any questions? We're going to do it relatively quickly, and then Aidan's going to give his presentation. Any questions? We will have the opportunity to do it at the end as well, if not now. But I'm going to just open it up. Anybody raising hands or popping their comments?
This isn't a question, it's just a comment of the class being about ethics. Listening to the presentation, which was very good, I felt like it gave students the space to reflect, and reflection is very important. And I just felt like I was reflecting as well, you know, trying to understand my roots in terms of where I'm from and what I am doing now, and how that would impact on my practice. And yeah, as I said, the class sounds very interesting.
Thank you. And they did talk about that reflection, particularly in the last week, when we literally asked them, how has this philosophical approach to values and ethics impacted on them? And they did reflect on that. It was really useful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Rita, I think you're mouthing, but I think you're muted.
Sorry. I should have clicked unmute rather than video, but here you go. You've got both. So thank you, Arlene. That was really, helpful in terms of how it was presented, I think, and the content of it. And I mean, specifically, although I've been practicing social work here for over 30 years, I did qualify abroad. I did qualify in India. And, one of my favorite subject was philosophy of social work. And, how you actually, I'm going to talk specifically because what I related to was about the Asian part of it and the symbol that represented it. And I think, obviously it cannot be broken down because if we started doing that, there's just so many facets to it that it's probably going to be impossible. But I still feel that we need people from all the cultures to be part of this, to be able to represent that point of view in an authentic manner, because I think that philosophy of what that culture represents, and then certainly the philosophy of how the social work is taught in different countries. I mean, I know Martin said, and about the journal as well, when it was introduced, that how it's actually been picked up worldwide about how the social work is practiced and taught, I should say first. So just a comment rather than...
Yeah, I mean, can I just come back? And obviously that was the starting point. In a lecture, I can't cover every single personal way of thinking, but what I did try to do was cover periods and different, philosophical points, but I really did try to home in on the ones that impacted on social work.
Yeah.
And one of the exercises that I used was think, pair and share, which had people go into groups, individually think of what this means to them, share it with a pair, and then talk about it with a pair, and then share it with the group. So they were constantly being made. It wasn't just about giving information. And so we did try to cover as much. But the assignment that they had at the end was for them to pick a philosopher or a philosophical point of view and discuss a dilemma, a case dilemma from that perspective, so that they were putting it into practice.
No, absolutely. No, thank you for doing that. I mean, it wasn't. No,
I didn't take it. I didn't take it as anything else. I didn't. Honestly, I didn't.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Arlene and Paul, for a great presentation.